The world of academia is changing, and according to our first guest, changing fast. How different will higher education be by the year 2030? Joining us now in Atlanta, Georgia, to tell us about the pace and direction of change, Richard DeMillo. He is director of the Center for 21st Century Universities at Georgia Tech. He's also the author of From Abelard to Apple, The Fate of American Colleges and Universities. And Richard, as I welcome you to the program, let's start with this, because you have said that the present American educational system is unsustainable. And I guess I wonder, what kind of system do you see replacing what we've got now?
Well, I think first of all, everyone who looks at higher education in the U.S. comes to that conclusion. It's unsustainable economically, unsustainable from a lot of dimensions. Where you go with that, I think, is the interesting question, and that's what has us all worked up at the moment. So help us figure that out. Where do you want to see it go? Well, we're in a situation where the public investment in the U.S. and I think I'm hearing this around the world as well, is tracking public confidence in higher education. To me, that always has a lot to do with value, perceived public value of the institutions. And when you peel away the layers of complexity here, it's less about the value of education than about the amount of resources being consumed by the institutions themselves. I think that's one of the reasons that we're seeing such a rush towards, let's say, people outside the traditional academic roles with new technologies, new ways of approaching students. And of course, all of this is happening at about the same time that the demographic for higher education is changing. We're used to thinking of college as a place for post-adolescents to go spend 4 years and then spend 60 years working. And now the majority of college students are outside that 18 to 24-year-old demographic. They are, in a sense, lifelong learners who are going to interact with higher education over the next 60 years, sometimes needing a degree, sometimes not needing a degree.
If part of the problem, though, is that what we've got is financially unsustainable, do you see a future where universities are much, much smaller, focusing on fewer and fewer things?
Well, it depends on how successful these new disruptive internet-based technologies are, because we know that when internet businesses succeed, when there's a restructuring of industries because of the internet, that the tendency is to sweep away the people who can't clearly articulate their value proposition. So we have a relatively small number of highly prestigious universities, good brand names, good global brands. They aren't terribly price sensitive. They will probably be just fine. But in the U.S., there are 3,000 to 4,000 other institutions that aren't in that boat. They are probably not going to survive in their current form. Some of them will restructure. Some of them will be replaced by many, many more smaller institutions in a process that we call moving to the long tail, where you have a lot of startup enterprises that don't have the high overhead, high fixed costs that a traditional university does, and are able to serve niche markets easily. So maybe many, many more universities, but a fundamental restructuring of the elite, what I call the middle, which is where most of the action is, and then the newcomers, the people that are really being disruptive.
Let me get you to weigh in on what you think the following implies. I think you point out that 2/3 of the grades that American universities and colleges give are A's and B's, and you think that's a problem. And I wonder what you think that says about the state of American education today.
Well, it gets balled up in what we were talking about a few seconds ago. There are a lot of traditional assumptions about higher education that are currently up in the air. One of them is that the credential, the reputation behind the college degree is what makes the high tuition worth it. And what we're seeing, of course, is that confidence is eroding. If you go to Silicon Valley, degrees are I guess, important to get people in the door. But frankly speaking, the Googles and HPs and Facebooks of the world are really more concerned with what you know, what you can demonstrate that you know. They know that all those A's and B's that are on transcripts don't really translate into business value for them, and so they're going to go beyond the degree itself. That's kind of a crushing blow for the value of a university degree, which has always been the stamp of approval, the stamp of quality that a college graduate is ready for the workforce.
I don't know if you're trying to be provocative with this next thing I'm going to put to you, but it seems it. So let's start with this. You suggest that the last important technological change that swept the educational system worldwide was something called a blackboard that was invented more than 200 years ago. So let's go from there and find out. 1801, that's right. So what's the new technology on the horizon that is going to have the kind of impact that the blackboard had 200 plus years ago?
Well, it would be great if we knew the answer to that, but we're only at the beginning stages of what I think is going to be a wave of innovation that'll take us there. Here's what I meant by that statement. Education today, and higher education in particular, is designed on a model in which a scholar stands in front of a room full of students and talks at them for an hour or 2 hours, and then goes away and then comes back and does it 2 or 3 more times a week, and that's how the learning process goes. That's what a traditional classroom is. There have been attempts to kind of snazz up that model to bring some bells and whistles in, but frankly speaking, all of those technologies have been in the service of making life easier for the professor. Nothing has really helped students manage the flow of information, manage the learning process. And the reason I think that model has survived so long is that it's been a way of managing the cost of having a small number of teachers reach a large number of students. What we're seeing today with new technologies like massive open online courses and MOOCs is that a lot of our assumptions, a lot of the things that were really the you can'ts of education are being pushed to the side because the technology has enabled a mode of interaction. So if I had to design a learning environment that was guaranteed to drive people away from the way that the brain learns, I would design the kind of classroom that we have today, the kind where there's a whiteboard or a blackboard in front and a so-called sage on a stage that talks at a class for an extended period of time. Nothing we know about brain science, about the way the brain works, suggests that that's the way people learn. And the interesting thing about the new technologies that we're seeing is that they at least have the promise of being more in tune with the way the brain learns, impresses short-term memory on long-term memory, and frankly speaking, the way that students become engaged and demonstrate their knowledge. You
just referred in the middle of that answer to something that really is a quite terrible acronym, MOOCs, which are the massive open online courses, which many people consider to be a dramatic innovation in education today. I want to play a little clip here, and then we're going to have somebody else join our conversation. Here is a promotional trailer for Udacity. This is a course on applied mathematics given by a German professor. Let's watch this. Roll tape, please.
Computer simulation tends to be viewed as rocket science. So let's do rocket science. With just the basic laws of gravity and a little programming, that's enough to rescue Apollo 13. You write a program to take the damaged spacecraft around the moon and bring it home safely. You look into how to stop the spread of diseases such as malaria, and you'll stop cars as quickly as possible using an anti-lock braking system. Finally, you'll predict the course of a wildfire. My name is Jörn, and I'll be teaching CS 222, Making Math Matter, Differential Equations in Action. See you soon on Udacity.
Okay, let's bring another voice into the conversation now. Joining us in Leuven, Belgium, via Skype, George Siemens. He's Associate Director, Technology Enhanced Knowledge Research Institute, Athabasca University in Alberta. And George, it's good of you to join us on TVO tonight. I wonder, you know a thing or two about MOOCs since you are, I guess, one of the early practitioners of this art. Why'd you become interested in this type of teaching?
I don't know if I was interested in this type of teaching so much as I was very interested in finding new ways to improve the social and collaborative experience of learning. So my interest was largely driven by how can we use the technologies that are available in many parts of our lives, and certainly in the lives of our students, and how can we bring that into the classroom to make the experience of a class more relevant.
Well, we just heard Richard say that one of the worst ways in terms of what the brain actually likes to teach people is have the sage on the stage at the front just orating on whatever. Do you think that the MOOC is a better way to teach people, and do people learn better that way?
I think one of the nice things about the MOOC format, and there are different formats, but broadly speaking, a MOOC gives individuals control, which means that if the professor is particularly boring, or if you get an extended talking head speaking at you, you can click, go to other spaces, you can, at the discussion forums, you can engage on Twitter. So there are options.
It does give the student more power in that respect. However, I've been reading in my New York Times lately that people like David Brooks and Tom Friedman point out that while they like MOOCs, the fact of the matter is 100,000 people have enrolled, and only 1% of the people who enroll actually finish the course online. So I wonder if this thing has as much future as some people who really like it think it does.
Well, two things about MOOCs. First of all, I'll just talk about their role. The Moocs movement, the way I see it right now, is more a purgatory period for higher education, where it's acclimating to its digital future. Moocs are just the first stage response. But so that's just a brief, MOOCs as a long-term trend, I think they'll be dramatic because of where it's going to lead higher education. The other aspect, though, of what are completion rates, and are they the same? Can we even use the language of completion rates in a MOOC the same way we use them in a classroom? If I go to university, in a physical university, I drop out. I've spent a lot of resources relocating. There's emotional, mental, social costs. I can join a MOOC at the click of a button, take what I want, and drop out or not continue. So I think the comparison of completion rates really doesn't provide much value, because those experiences and the thresholds for getting involved and the costs of dropping out are completely different aspects.
Okay, fair enough. Richard DeMillo, can I get you to weigh in on that difference between...
Can I just jump in on there?
Sure,
yeah. I think George is exactly right on this. The whole idea of a completion rate presumes that the student has been through a selection process in order to get into the course to begin with. So there's an expectation on the part of the student that they are going to follow this course and complete it. That's very much unlike the MOOC experience, where anyone with the click of a mouse can enroll in the course, whether or not they intend to complete the course. And in fact, what we're finding is that when you start looking at people who actually intend to complete MOOCs, even in their current, as George points out, primitive format, the completion rates tend to be wildly higher than traditional bricks and mortar universities. Coursera, one of the MOOC providers, just started offering what they call a signature track for their MOOCs, in which you have to pay a small fee in order to enroll in the course, in order to get a certificate of completion. Completion rates for the first round of MOOCs with the signature track are above 80%. Well, 80% is a hugely positive completion rate. That would take it to the most elite universities in the U.S. So if that's the future that we're looking at, it's not a bad future. I would really discourage anyone from taking a look at this fictitious idea of a completion rate, which measures essentially nothing that's related to learning, and look, in fact, at what people who intend to complete actually do when they follow the courses.
Richard, I know we're going to lose our satellite to you in just a few minutes, so let me read one more thing to you and then get you to comment on that. This is from Doug Mann, who's a professor at Western University in London, Ontario. He's in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies. And he had this to say about what we're talking about right now. The real question is how computers, smartphones, and iPods are used, and whether these uses contribute anything to the main goal of higher education, to improve students' minds and characters by helping them to learn facts, debate ideas, and understand the world better. The answer, for the most part, is no. Study after study shows that digital technology has dumbed down higher education. They may make education more, quote, fun and engaging, but that's only saying that they've turned education into a form of entertainment. Writing essays, reading difficult texts, or figuring out complex mathematical problems have never been fun and never will be. Want to comment on that, Richard?
Sure. Well, he's exactly wrong about this. We've known for 30 years that the kind of teaching that takes place in a MOOC, particularly the MOOCs that we're talking about today, are exactly what enables learning. There's a famous educational researcher named Bloom, who wrote a paper with his students in the early 1980s that went back and looked in what they call a meta-study at 100 years of educational research. Bloom and his students determined that if you move from this traditional classroom, the sage on a stage classroom that we're talking about, to the kind of learning that this technology enables, you can essentially move the performance of everyone in the traditional classroom to the 90th percentile. That's what statisticians would call a 1 sigma increase in performance. And in fact, if you give them the kind of personalization technology that the MOOCs currently offer, you can move them another standard deviation. That's like taking a whole class, independent of ability, independent of subject matter, independent of geography, and moving everyone to the 98th percentile. You essentially enable learners in every environment, at every level of difficulty, to excel. And that's what the data shows. So when you think about what technology does, it's not fun technology. It's not technology that's there for technology's sake. It removes the you can'ts. The reason that no one has done the Bloom 2 sigma problem for the last 30 years is that it's been enormously expensive to imagine how you would do that. And now we have technology that enables you to actually implement that strategy.
Richard DeMillo, it's awfully good of you to join us on the line from Atlanta, Georgia. We thank you so much for contributing to our discussion here today. All the best.
Great. It was great to be with you.
We're going to broaden our discussion now. Joining us in the studio, Cheryl Mezak, Vice President and Provost at the University of Toronto. Julia Christensen Hughes, Dean of the College of Management and Economics at the University of Guelph. Robert Luke, Assistant Vice President of Research and Innovation at George Brown College in Toronto. And Harvey Weingarten, President and CEO of the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario, whose acronym is?
HECO.
HECO. What the hecko is HECO? Never mind. We'll come back to that in a second. Just before we chat, I want to play a little clip here as well. Oh, and I want to remind everybody, of course, that George Siemens from Athabasca University, who's on the Skype from Belgium right now, is joining us as well. And now we're going to play this clip. This is called Why I Hate School But Love Education, and it's had 2 million views on YouTube in 4 months. Let's play that, then we'll come back and chat. Roll tape, please.
Education is about inspiring one's mind, not just filling their head. And take this from me, because I'm a educated man myself, who only came to this realization after countless nights in the library, with a can of Red Bull keeping me awake till dawn and another can in the morn, falling asleep in between piles of books which probably equated to the same amount I had spent on my rent, memorize equation, facts and dates right down to the letter, half of which I'd never remember and half of which I'd forget straight after the exam and before the start of the next semester, asking anyone if they had notes for the last lecture. I often found myself running to class just so I could find a spot on which I could rest my head and fall asleep without making a scene. Ironic, because that's the only time I ever spent in university chasing my dreams. And then after nights with a dead mind, I then find myself in a queue of half-awake student zombies waiting to hand in an assignment. Maybe that's why they called it a deadline.
That's good. Okay, Julia, get us started here. The shake-up in education that we're talking about today, how does it manifest itself where you are?
Well, there's a lot that's been changing. I have to say, yes, there's more change to come, absolutely. But when I've been in higher education for over 25 years, and when I look back over changes that have been happening, say the last 5-10 years, I think they've been remarkable. I think one of the most significant ways I've seen that change manifest is much more focus on the quality of the undergraduate learning experience and supporting the clip that we've just seen, really asking tough questions about how we make learning more engaging, more effective. and challenging the sage on the stage and having students working in all kinds of interesting, amazing ways in classrooms, using technology out in the community. And just to sort of challenge, I suppose, something that Richard, the guest, said, does technology have the opportunity to create engaging learning environments? Absolutely, with a big caveat, done properly. A classroom can be engaging or not. Online learning can be engaging or not. It's how do we construct the learning space? What do we ask students to do within it? And how do we assess what they've learned? If we get those things right, education can be powerful.
Cheryl, what do you see?
Well, for one thing, I think the sage on the stage is a bit of an urban myth. So University of Toronto, it's a pretty big university. We have a lot of students, but we have a very explicit big and small strategy. So last week, I was at the poster session for the Victoria College One stream, where these first-year science kids had their professional-looking posters up. They each worked with a faculty mentor, usually in the Faculty of Medicine, some world-famous researcher, and they produced really just astounding, almost research journal-ready articles. These are 17 and 18-year-olds that have had a huge amount of one-on-one attention poured into them by fantastic faculty members, as I say, just stellar researchers. You're not going to get that on a MOOC. So MOOCs are really important. The University of Toronto is certainly the Canadian university that's been first out the gate. We have 12 of them. We have almost 400,000 students taking them around the world. And we use them right now in our classrooms really to flip the classroom. So there's an inverted classroom phenomenon where you can put the lectures out on these very high production valued lecture capture MOOCs, and then you can use your in-class time to do more one-on-one small group activities, and that actually has been what's been really transformative for us.
I want to see Luke teach a MOOC. Is that possible?
Of course it's possible.
Yeah? Robert, how do you see this unveiling itself at George Brown?
Well, certainly I think that MOOCs have a lot of potential, as some of the others have said. I don't think that it's a disruptive innovation, though. I think it's incremental. I think we've seen this narrative before 3,000 years ago, and Plato talked about in the Phaedrus that the advent of writing is going to lead to people forgetting too much. So technology has always been licensed to forget. I think that there certainly is a lot of capability in the internet and how we can use various communication technologies. I do disagree with the scholar you quoted from Western. I think that the real principle here is that we have to use the media of communication that are current and that our students expect us to. But for me, the real value here is on experiential learning. The point of education, as I've heard somebody say, is to make one privately happy and publicly useful. And our goal as a college is to enable students to learn, to really go from head to heart to hand, to think about something, to know something, and to be able to do it. So for me, it's all about skills. MOOCs are important. They're a good way to transmit information and create learning community. But at the end of the day, I want to ensure that the person who is actually working in an environment knows how to do something. So skills are what are important to me.
That's a great quote. Privately happy and publicly useful. Whose quote is that, do you know?
John Godfrey, the head of the Toronto French School, said that.
Oh yeah, former member of Parliament.
Yes, yeah.
And actually, I think he used to host programs here 25 years ago. But that's another story. We know John Godfrey is the point. Okay, Mr. Hecko, where are you coming from on this?
So we are an agency that does research on higher education. There are a lot of questions about higher education. What are the most effective teaching methods? Are students learning the right thing? Is the Ontario, for example, higher education system organized in the right way? There's lots of opinions, a huge number of people making assertions, and what we say is we actually have to test to see what works and what doesn't work. So is it better, for example, do you learn more if you participate in a MOOC versus a sage on the stage? I don't know the answer to that, but I can know how to do the experiment to find out when it works, how it works, for which students does it work.
And the experiment is what? Give them a test? See what they remember?
No, not at all. To actually start measuring, which is what we're doing in Ontario, and some of the many institutions in Ontario and around the world are doing this, is to identify what it is that we expect students to know and be able to do at the end of a course or at the end of a degree, and actually to devise measurements to see whether they've acquired those skills and that knowledge.
Well, you all know Dr. Charles Pascal, who was Dalton McGuinty's early childhood education advisor, who wrote in the Globe and Mail last fall, when it comes to post-secondary education, Ontario has been muddling through without a clear vision for years, marked by one-off ideas informed more by facile and ego-driven lobbying than a learner and learning-centered vision. Post-secondary education in Ontario seems to be more of a non-system than ever, arguably the ad hocness monster of Canadian higher education. There's one thing I'll say for Charles Pascal. Guy never takes a position on everything. Yeah. He's always on the fence. Okay, Julia, do you agree with what he has to say?
No.
Any of it?
No. Well, I mean, is there room for improvement in the system? Absolutely. But if you look at some of the research that Harvey's team has been pulling together in this province, we have the most productive system in the province. If you look at the number of students who are coming through our doors, the number of faculty who we have to teach them. And as I mentioned earlier, I think that there's been phenomenal transformation and will continue to be there. I think one of the things that the government has recently insisted be done is for each institution to publicly report in what's being referred to as a strategic mandate agreement, its vision for itself, the areas that it's going to focus on. I think that's a great step to have all of our, everyone in the system go through that process, identify those priorities. So all I can say about that quote is wow.
Well, let me get George on this. George, I know this quote refers to Ontario's post-secondary system, but you're part of Canada. You're in Alberta. Could we say the same for what's going on out west?
I would actually be comfortable, saying that there are, various factors at play, but there are certainly segments of the system globally, not just in Canada, that suffer from these challenges of more ego and politically driven than actual focus on learner-centered learning. I think part of the challenge is defining learner-centered learning, but this is one of the things that excites me about not just Moocs, because it's important to remember systems like Athabasca University, we have 40,000 students. We do bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees online. And in those kinds of a setting, the experience of the learners can be quite exceptional. So we need to look at the evidence, the research that exists there, but by the same account, there's a lot of pressure to form the system by political or, in some cases, corporate desires.
Well, let's hit this right on the head, Cheryl. Athabasca doesn't have any buildings. You got lots of buildings. Are you therefore a better university than theirs?
We're a different university. So one of the things, and maybe the thing that Charles Pascal is trying to get at here, is that in the province of Ontario and in the country of Canada, we don't do much by way of differentiation. We don't say, here are some universities that fulfill this function. Here are some universities that fulfill a different function, and colleges play this role, and the University of Athabasca, which is a leader in online distance education, fills a different role. Rather, we are good Canadians, and we take our resources and we kind of spread them around evenly. And at some point, this country has to ask itself, do we want some number of universities that are truly excellent? So we saw recently in the last international rankings, a huge slippage amongst Canadian universities where almost all of them fell. Some tumbled down the ranking scales. The University of Toronto was a blip. We went down from 19th to 21st in the world. That's all right as long as it's not the beginning of a trend.
How did McGill do?
It slipped. I believe, right? I mean, so the Canadian universities did not perform well this year.
But you're basically saying at some point we can't be so egalitarian, we got to fish or cut bait.
That's right. We have to decide whether we're in the excellence game or whether we're in the mediocrity game in terms of our best universities. So other nations, Germany, England, Australia, they've put additional resources in their truly great universities, and they've measured greatness in various ways, and that's what Harvey's shop is engaged in doing. But we don't do that in Canada.
Well, you've done a report on this. Does your report, in your view, reflect the sentiment that Chuck Pascal was bringing forward?
Yes, it does.
So you think he's on the right track there?
Yeah, I would never be as categorical as Charles is inclined to be, but essentially has it right. So at the request of the government, we convened an expert panel to actually assess the strategic mandate agreement submissions that were made by the 44 Ontario post-secondary institutions. And I think they came out with a set of conclusions and a report, and these are experts in post-secondary education, that captures what Charles is saying. That A, we have to pursue, that we need more system-level planning in Ontario. What's going on now is a little bit ad hoc. And may I say, since I worked in both Ontario and Alberta, Alberta's a far more organized system than Ontario is. And the panel points that out.
A lot smaller, too.
It is smaller. And they also promote the idea, as Cheryl said, of that we have to start thinking about, in a much more systematic, active way, about system differentiation. We're not all the same.
Appreciate that, but I wonder, Robert, whether when people in the community college world hear that, what they're hearing is, basically, U of T gets all the money and everybody else can just go you know where.
Well, we can let the U15 fight out who's the best research university in the province. I was privileged to serve on the Council of Canadian Academies expert panel reviewing science and technology last year, and we're in the top 5 in the world in many areas of basic research. This is really good. Where we fall down as a country is in applied research and commercialization. We have one of the worst records in the world. Colleges are stepping into that and conducting applied research in concert with industry partners, which are doing 2 really important things. Number 1, they're helping industry to innovate, which is necessary in this country. And number 2, we're teaching students valuable innovation skills that they get in concert with their education. And this is an important point which I think Pascal is leading us to. He's making a very bold statement. He's creating gravitational pull to move us along a continuum. We don't have a student-centered system, as we've heard. We have an inside-out designed system. We need something from the outside in. We don't serve students well in this province by enabling them to transfer credits from college to college or college to university. And the reality is that students will be voting with their mouses, their mice, like they'll be clicking away to find the program and the credit and credential that is going to get them the skills that they need at a particular time in their life, in a particular context that they have.
Well, let me get George on this, because if I understand the argument, most universities don't like the notion of students being able to sort of go back and forth between community colleges and universities and have community college credits recognized as being equal to universities, because universities don't think they're equal to community colleges. They think they're better. They think that what they offer is, and don't like, okay, we'll get into this in a second here, but I'm cutting the chase here with the argument. But they don't think there is an equivalence between what you learn at university and what you learn at community college. Am I onto something here?
I think you are. There is a sense of elitism in the university sector. I agree with some of the points, and I've taught in the community college sector. I was at Red River College before I went to University of Manitoba, so I'm familiar with the attitudes in those different systems. To a degree, it's also true. I mean, we value basic research that we can patent and generate revenue from as a country and as an individual system. We value that type of research more than we value applied research or research that gives us more pragmatic or practical, immediately usable innovations. And I think one of the points I'd like to emphasize in this regard is there's a challenge here from government and from a leadership perspective. In Canada, we have a problem where we do great with innovations early on, but we fail to execute sustainably and scale them up. We've got Desire to Learn out of Waterloo, which is one of the top edtech companies in the world. You know, we had Smart Technologies out of Calgary, Illuminate out of Calgary. You know, these companies, we have the ideas and the innovation, and I think at a university level we face a similar challenge. It's not that we lack ideas on some levels, but we need a university leader or group of leaders that are able to chart a vision that goes beyond, this is my university. And I appreciate the desire to have, you know, target our best universities and make them better. My thinking would be a bit different, though, which is focus on collaboration across the system and raise the value of the entire system up by focusing on connected specialization.
Let me follow up on that with Julia. If as everybody I talk to in the post-secondary world seems to think that the jobs of the future are going to require both a university degree and a community college degree, why has there been apparently so little cooperation when it comes to recognizing course credits and so on between these two different worlds?
Such a great question. I'll start by saying that I think that there are differences in the system, and the college-university distinction is one of those. Our institutions attract different kinds of students with different kinds of interests, and I think the college system, provides a number of services, a number of different kinds of programs, everything from very applied auto mechanics, apprenticeship programs, through to accounting programs. So it's
computer generation of movies.
Yeah, so it's really hard to compare, right? So would every college credit apply equally into a university system? No. But should some, and should we create more effective pathways? Absolutely. I'm a big proponent that we need to support the development of these pathways to make it easier where it's appropriate, and I would say both ways. My own son, we were talking earlier in the break, has a science degree from the University of Guelph, and completing that, he went to George Brown for a program in orthotics and prosthetics. It was a brilliant combination of a 4-year science program followed by, once he knew what he wanted to do, a very focused college program. It's just like in universities, we have students doing undergraduate degree going on to law school or medical school, again, with then a more focused practical application. And I think we really have to not polarize the system and to say one is better than the other. We're different, we do different things. And by working collaboratively, students can get the best of both worlds.
Sure. Harvey, weigh in on this if you would.
We have the system we designed. And in Ontario, we designed a system that wasn't intended to promote transfer from colleges to university. And guess what? We don't have a lot of transfer from colleges to university. In other provinces where the system was designed for the colleges to feed universities, there's a huge amount of transfer. And so I would encourage people to go look at the expert panel report that we put out a week or so ago, because what it says very clearly is we need to change. It's for the institutions and the government and the public to decide what we wish. And what the expert panel did is laid out a roadmap that when you know what objectives you want, here are the processes you follow to make sure you get there in the most efficient, effective way. And that's what we need to do.
Let me get the U of T to weigh in on this, because I can imagine the guy who goes to Sheridan and learns how to do computer generation, crazy things on a computer, and then go work for Pixar in Hollywood and make lots of money, saying to themselves, the university world doesn't think my credentials are as impressive as the person who gets a degree in philosophy. And yet the person with that degree in philosophy may make 1/10 of the money I make going off to Hollywood making movies. Explain.
So that's a great example for us, because we actually have a joint program with Sheridan in this very domain.
I didn't even know that.
You didn't know it? I know you didn't know it because you're trying to provoke me to another answer. So look, here's one way in which colleges and universities can work beautifully together. We can have joint programs where in this case, the more technical computer animation, brilliant work that is being done at Sheridan is delivered by Sheridan, and the more theoretical work is done by the Mississauga campus at the University of Toronto. But that said, I think we need to be careful not to, as I think Harvey said, set up a polar opposite kind of picture here. So colleges teach some philosophy, and universities do a huge amount of applied research and also have applied programs. So at the U of T, we have 80 professional master's programs. So what we need to do is to lay down a number of tracks. So when you have a student finishing a bachelor's degree, they might go to George Brown and go into a 1-year or 2-year wonderful program that puts them into a fantastic job. They may do a professional master's degree at the University of Toronto that puts them into a fantastic job. The bachelor's degree, and this is actually the biggest transformation, I think, in education since, well, actually, I think not since my day, because it was already happening in my day. But it used to be that a bachelor's degree put you onto Bay Street, put you into some wonderful job. And now it tends to be a bachelor's degree plus a master's degree or a college degree. And this is as it should be. We need to set out a huge range of choices for our students. They're all different. And for some, it's going to be one thing that's required, and for some, it's going to be another.
I'm looking for my New York Times quote here. Vodik, which one is it here? Oh, here we are, page 1, right? I want to put this. This is in the New York Times a couple of months ago. I seem to be quoting the Times a lot these days, but they've had a lot to say about this lately. New York Times reported 2 months ago, the college degree is becoming the new high school diploma, the new minimum requirement, albeit an expensive one, for getting even the lowest level job. That speaks to what you were just referring to. And I wonder, do you see that as well?
Well, this is part of a creeping credentialism that we've seen happening for a long time. University degrees were typically the purview of society's elite, and now we're seeing more and more people, and in Ontario, we're encouraging more people to get a post-secondary education. Canada has the most educated population on the planet. No other country in the world educates their population to the degree that we do, only when you include colleges. I think we're number 8 for university attainment. The key thing for me, though, is linking the credential to what the labor market needs. So colleges are very explicit in our mandate. We're instrumental. We take a lot of people. 20% of our 20,000 full-time students come to us with a university degree. And they're coming to us to take a 1-year graduate certificate program to learn how to articulate skills that will get them the job.
What do you think that number was 25 years ago?
I have no idea,
Probably
but
zero.
probably
Vanishingly small.
Yeah, probably
vanishingly
zero.
small.
So that's an amazing change.
It is, and the point for us is that every program that we offer is mandated to have what's called a program advisory committee. And this is a committee made up of people from industry, representatives who are saying, these are the skills and attributes that we need. And the key thing for colleges, and I know HECO has done some good work on this recently, is that everything is oriented towards outcomes, outcomes-based learning. You know when you're coming into a program, what skills you will end up with and what careers and jobs are available to you. I think that's a huge thing. I'm very happy that HECO is recommending that the universities follow suit. The universities' career centers are an afterthought. Unless you're in a vocational program like medicine, law, or engineering, the career center is something you visit towards the end of your 4-year degree when you're trying to figure out what is next.
Well, I wonder whether that means, George, let me bring you in on this. I wonder whether that means the employers of the future are going to be looking less at the letters that come after your name and more at what you can actually do, what your skills actually are, and that you can demonstrate that you can do. What do you think?
I would agree. I would argue that probably a trend as significant, if not more so, than MOOCs is broadly, ironically, the granularization of learning. And that means that the units of learning are decreasing. So instead of course models, we're going to outcomes, or in some cases, competency-based learning, which then allows us to bring in workplace learning, prior learning assessment. And we have an opportunity now where, well, maybe opportunity not quite yet, but we are fragmenting much of the education experience. And the future of the university model is one where we stitch those together into something new and different that we don't yet understand. So we may well find that a student that comes to University of Toronto or George Brown or Guelph or Athabasca will have taken some courses with Coursera and received a certificate. Maybe they've done some self-regulated or self-directed learning. They did some volunteer work. They spent some time in a work experience setting. And now the goal or the need for the university will be to stitch those competencies together and compare it to something that may be a degree. The badging movement is one that's had a fair bit of success with trying to advocate for this, but learning is granularizing, and the units of recognition for our learning are also granularizing.
Just take a second. Tell us what you mean by the badging movement.
Oh, sure. So there's been a movement over the last few years about badging, which is the use of badges to indicate competence on specific skills acquired. We see this already on a lot of the social media tools we use, or if you do use some tools like keeping track of your fitness. If you use Foursquare to check in, you'll get little badges that'll say, oh, you've checked in 10 times, you're a jet setter. So from a learning end, it might be, oh, you've spent 5 hours programming Python, you're a Python programmer stage 0.5. And as you do more work with it and you move up, you get recognition for small progressive developments in skill and knowledge.
So the days of we don't need no stinking badges are over, apparently.
Well, listen, when you leave a university now, they give you a transcript that has the courses you've taken and the grades you took. But we are already working with colleges and universities in Ontario that are working towards, when a student leaves, giving them not only a list of courses and the grades they got, but a transcript that attests to the competencies. Yeah. They're numerate. They can read and write in whatever languages they can. They are critical thinkers, problem solvers, and one of the most interesting areas of research in higher education now, and in fact Ontario is doing a lot of work in this, is to try to figure out how to measure these things. But here's our problem. We're quoting the New York Times and Tom Friedman, so I'm pretty sure I read this in one of his columns. He pointed out that 60% of the jobs that students in university and college today will have 10 years from now, we don't know what those jobs are. Right. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the kind of education we should be giving our university and college students, given that we are preparing them for jobs that we can't define or identify now? Yeah. And that is a critically interesting and important problem. And again, I think we should applaud many of the colleges and universities in Ontario and around the world who are struggling with exactly that issue.
Julia.
Yeah, I want to, actually I agree with you on that front, Harvey. I think we have to recognize that we're going through a profound economic shift. We talk about this movement towards a knowledge economy. There's a lot of concern, angst about employment rates, and I've heard this debate about, go to college if you want a job, go to university if you're not maybe so worried about that. Whereas in fact, if you look at the statistics, universities outpace colleges when it comes to employment, both 6 months out and 2 years out. Where we have a gap is, I don't think, is an issue with the education being provided, but is more reflective of what's happening in the world generally. In Canada, if you want to be employed and employed well, your best bet is still to go to university. And we heard the gentleman from the US speaking about this in the value proposition. Well, tuitions in the United States are significantly higher than in Canada.
3 to 5.
Yeah, and if you do the return on investment again, and the data supports this, to get a university education, you're not only going to be employed, you will be employed well and earn more money and make a significant contribution to the tax base. So all of that is there. But I really want to reinforce what Harvey was saying. Because of this shift in the economy to a knowledge-based jobs. That's one of the reasons why I'm such a proud proponent of the university system, because it does provide students with this opportunity to develop these skills that will serve them well in multiple careers that they will have over the course of their lifetime.
Cheryl.
So allow me to disagree with Harvey.
Oh, good.
I know you like to
That's
disagree
allowed here.
So if you get an A average in your undergraduate degree from the University of Toronto, that's a stamp that says you know how to read and write. You know how to, and with curriculum reform, we now make sure that our students in arts and science have all the range of skills, critical thinking, numeracy.
Cheryl, if you get an A from U of T, you better be able to know more than just reading and writing.
Exactly.
That better stand for something more than just that.
Exactly. That's why we don't need to test people on the way out to see if they can read and write. So nothing makes our students more angry, more cross, than giving them something that they say is just like those literacy tests that they had to take in grade 3, 6, and 9. Right? And if you have kids, who were doing well in the school system, you know how irritated they were at the literacy tests, and they are even more irritated with learning outcomes tests, because they really feel, and they're right in feeling this, that they've been thoroughly and effectively tested, and they've got, but what our students are really interested in, to George's point, is having on their transcript a co-curricular record. So you have your A's and your B's, and from the University of Toronto or from McGill or from the University of Alberta, and that tells the world something. But what the world doesn't know is what else you did. So we have now, we're developing a long list of other things that our students do. Some of them are very formal. You sit on governing council, you participate in this, that, or the other club or activity. And we're adding these to the transcript, and our students love it.
Okay, but let me follow up. I'm going to get to funding in a second, Harvey, so stand by for a second. But Robert, I want to follow up with you on this. If 60% of the jobs 10 years from now don't exist today, and you guys are in the business of basically teaching people a skill, a job, like, oh my God, you guys sit around and think, what the hell are we going to do 10 years from now?
All the time. We actively, annually look at our programs, look where the labor market is going, and figure out what new programs do we need to create for emergent industry needs. It's part of our DNA because we're close to industry. We want to see where the puck is going. We want to make sure that the skills that are coming on stream down the road are going to be prepared. And part of that is bridging from the programs that we have or the university programs and making sure that the knowledge and skills that we're teaching now can be bridged into the future. I do want to refute your statistics on university versus college, because the problem with the way those are reported is it doesn't differentiate if you went to both. It's only the last place you went. So what you said actually isn't true. You can't say that one is different or leads to more labor outcomes from the other, because you're only getting the last. I did my undergraduate degree in British Columbia, 2 years in a college, 2 years in a university. According to Statistics Canada, I'm a university graduate, but I'm also a college graduate. So because we don't have...
It's more complicated than
it's
that, you're
much
saying.
more complicated,
Okay.
and I caution us of that.
I got a few minutes left. I want to talk to Harvey about funding. Right now, if you're a student, you go to any university or college or whatever, obviously the public is paying through its taxes, is paying a huge chunk of the share of educating you. Do you think that we should change the way we do that so that maybe the better schools get more money, worse schools get worse money?
Sure, thanks. First of all, let me say that based again on the analyses that we've done of the productivity of the Ontario system, let's applaud the Ontario post-secondary system. This system is doing more, producing better outcomes with less resources than any other province in Canada, and they deserve recognition for that. What we're all worried about is how do we sustain quality, and how do we keep our students competitive with what's going on in the rest of the world, which is making huge investments into higher education. And so it's not just a matter of saying, look, students have to pay more, because they will rightfully ask, pay more for what? Mm-hmm. What value are we getting? The public will ask that, the parents will ask that, and the government will ask the same. So to answer your question, one of the things we have to get much better at is at documenting the value of higher education. And if I can disagree with my colleague for one moment, I don't think that simply giving people a transcript is accepted anymore as the right attestation that they got value. They're looking for more than that. And that's where things like co-curricular transcripts, badges, competency-based credentialing comes in. And so it's impossible to answer your question without also answering the issue of how all of this ties to quality and to the competitiveness and the quality of the students we graduate.
I appreciate that. And George, I got a minute left. Let me give it to you. If there were some independent, verifiable means of saying this university is higher quality, its student outcomes are better, the students like it better, should governments therefore then give more money to that university at another university or college's expense?
I would say no, for a variety of reasons. One is the reason that one university is producing better outcomes might well be because they've been better funded in the past for a variety of reasons. Another challenge is quite often certain systems, regionally or otherwise, have a different profile student base. So that means they may have students who come from a lower socioeconomic status, which is well reported to result in more challenges in entering the education system. So I think the bigger questions would be around asking, why are those particular systems underperforming? If U of Toronto is doing a better job graduating students than a community college, well, I would expect that to be the case. But what I would want instead is to say, if University of Toronto is doing a better job preparing graduates than a university that has almost an identical imprint and identical profile, then yeah, in that instance where you are comparing like systems with like systems, then it probably makes sense to rethink funding. But the education system, and this is quite important, is a very nuanced structure that has a variety of socioeconomic factors underneath it that need to be considered before we make funding changes.
Gotcha. George, you got right to time. That was perfect. George Siemens, Athabasca University, we thank you for joining us on the line from overseas. And here in our studio, Cheryl Misak from the University of Toronto, Julia Christensen Hughes from the University of Guelph, Robert Luke from George Brown College, Harvey Weingarten from What the Heck is HECO. That's the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario. Great discussion, everybody. I know we scratched the surface, but we'll have you back. Do it again.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.